Hello, my name is Desalyn Williams, and I'll be speaking with you this evening on the Sex Trafficking Act. The problem that requires policy redress is the Justice for Victims of Sex Trafficking Act of 2015. Sex trafficking manifests itself as sexual slavery or human trafficking. This trafficker sells a person, mostly women and children, to customers who perform sexual acts or services. There are three ways that trafficking occurs. The first one is child sex tourism. The second, domestic minor sex trafficking. And number three, commercial sexual exploitation of children and prostitution. Victims of self trafficking are most likely coerced or abused into slavery, thus making it difficult for the International Labor Organization to obtain accurate statistics. This act holds buyers and traffickers accountable for sex trafficking offenses. Sex trafficking is a global cancer. According to the International Labor Organization, nearly 5 million women and children are coerced into slavery. This problem, unfortunately, is not an isolated problem. Globally, it is widespread throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, Iran, Israel, and even the United States. This crime is then divided again to suit traffickers in the form of pimp controlled, gang controlled, familial, forced marriage, and survival sex. In the United States alone, statistics report between 14 and 18,000 victims. A policy solution to address the problem because far too many women and children fall prey to this victim. Funding is needed to provide assistance to not only those who have been victimized by sex trafficking, but to amend existing laws in place to elevate the criminal repercussion to stiffer penalties. The Justice of Victims of Trafficking Act of 2013 was first introduced in the 113th United States Congress on November 19, 2013, by Republican Texas Representative Ted Poe. A revised act was submitted on January 13, 2015, by Republican Texas Senator John Cornyn, Democratic Oregon Senator John Wyden, Republican Illinois Senator Mark Kirk, and Democratic Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. This edition of Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, focused on strengthening law enforcement provisions, and resources became available to the victims to help restore their lives, using the very fines that proven offenders are ordered to pay. The objective of the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act of 2015 was to impose an additional assessment of $5,000 on any person convicted of slavery and trafficking, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or abuse of children, transportation for illegal sexual activity, human smuggling in violation of the Immigration and Nationality Act. This is found in Section 101 of this Act. This section also formats the Domestic Trafficking Victims Fund. Funds received will be used to present grants and awards to states that are dedicated to countering trafficking, development and execution of child abuse, investigation, prosecution programs, and to provide service for victims of child pornography. These funds, however, will not be used for health care or medical items or services unless it is for medical items or services to victims of trafficking. Section 102 clarifies the allowance to U.S. citizens and permanent residents who are victims of severe forms of trafficking to obtain benefits and services available to such victims without obtaining certification from the Department of Health and Human Services of their status as victims. In the subsequent sections, various amendments and clarifications are put in place to ensure protection, safety, and restoration to the victims of trafficking. This policy contains benefits that include services to victims of human trafficking and sets up a fund to cover the cost of the program. Offenders are ordered to pay a special assessment of $5,000 upon conviction of any of the before mentioned crimes. A domestic trafficking victims fund is also established and funded for this revenue. Any unused balances from the domestic trafficking fund will be transferred to the crime victims fund. Another benefit of this act allows U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents to be recognized as human trafficking victims. This would assure that services will not be denied solely because of their citizenship or residency status. Victims of sex trafficking benefit from programs that include training law enforcement to rescue exploited children, create task forces, and investigate and prosecute human traffickers. This section is a collaboration of law enforcement, social services, emergency responders, children advocacy centers, victim service provider, and nonprofits in an effort to provide a comprehensive approach to combating trafficking and serving victims. Restorative services are provided for victims of child pornography. Eligibility for requiring benefits or program services are in the event of severe form of trafficking under age 18. No certification is required. U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents do not need to obtain a certification in order to receive services. These services are delivered through case management and Health and Human Services. An email and/or helpline phone number is provided. The Office on Trafficking in Person, or the OTIP, usually sends a certification letter to the victim of trafficking in care of a service provider or another person assisting the recipient. The victim must also be willing to assist in every reasonable way in the investigation and prosecution of severe forms of trafficking. Receive continued presence from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and in order to contribute to the prosecution of traffickers. The Domestic Trafficking Victims Fund is funded from the special $5,000 assessment from federal offenders paid upon conviction of human trafficking, sexual abuse, child pornography, child sex exploitation, interstate transportation for illegal sexual activity, commercial human smuggling, which would pay more than 6,200 victims per year, or the equivalent of $31 million in obligated assessments. All penalties collected under the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act will be collected in the same manner that criminal fines are collected under current law. Any surplus or balances would then be transferred to the Domestic Trafficking Victims Fund. The aspect of this policy that needs to change in order to make related programs and services more effective and efficient is the disadvantage that the U.S. citizens are victims of human trafficking are placed when seeking restorative and protective services. Under the Traffic Victims Protection Act, non-citizen trafficking victims may become eligible for federally funded services and benefits after HHS or the Secretary of Homeland Security issues an official certification to them. But U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents are not eligible for this certification. This discrepancy in certification has led to confusion and often has the effect of categorically excluding domestic human trafficking victims from receiving protective and restorative services. With the exception of this discrepancy, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act is effective and seems to be an efficient deterrent to such crimes. This act should have the same effect for victims across the board. It is to provide services to victims of sex trafficking. Where is the room for distinguishing what nationality or citizenship one possesses? How does an American-born policy provide exclusions for its own people? I would advocate change to include all citizens, domestic and international. Thank you for your time.